Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Work Matters, where we take some time to get to know a member of our church and explore the work that they do, how the Lord has worked in their lives, and the intersection of their faith and their work. And we are recording this the week of Easter. So this is Holy Week, and you'll, of course, be watching this a couple of weeks later. And I'm really excited to introduce you to our guest today. This is Grace Ueng, and Grace and I connected about having this episode following Made for Mission Week when she reached out, expressing some interest in some of the things that we talked about, and I have learned that she is a wonderful, wonderful asset in this conversation, and I'm really excited to have her here with us. So, Grace, thank you for taking time to join us today.
Thank you so much, Roddy, for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was thrilled when you reached out and you sent me links to some of the exciting things that you're doing, and we will get to that in just a little bit, but I'd love to start at the beginning. So you mentioned that you were born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. What was it like growing up there?
Yeah, it was a great place to grow up. That was before Atlanta got so the way it is now. But yeah, we grew up in a northeastern suburb of Atlanta as my dad was a professor at Georgia Tech. And there weren't many Asians at the time in Atlanta. So we had a close knit group of Chinese families that became our second families, as most of them all came here from Taiwan or China. And I grew up thinking that everyone's dad was a Chinese professor at Emory or Georgia Tech. So it was more unusual then to be Asian growing up, but we did really enjoy growing up in Atlanta. It was a great place to grow up.
Oh, good. You mentioned, right before we started recording, you were telling me about, because I was asking you about the pronunciation of your last name, and you mentioned asking your dad how it's pronounced. Would you mind sharing that story really quickly? I found that to be really fascinating.
Sure. This was back when I had just turned 40, and I had literally gone downhill in a cycling accident. And one of the results of having a head injury, a brain injury, was that my long-term memory came back and my short-term memory was gone. And my first words were in Chinese. I actually told my mom "gan gan," which means dry, because I joked that I was telling my mom not to change. She didn't have to change my diaper. So I was part of the head injury. Result of that was I started just being fascinated with my roots. And I decided that I wanted to be really Chinese because I sort of was a banana growing up. And I asked my father, since my sister pronounced our name slightly differently, which confused our high school teachers, I asked my dad, how should I pronounce our last name? And he explained to me, because he said more like "ong," and I had just said "ung" before. And I know that's a very slight difference, but he explained to me that depending on what province you are in China, it's pronounced differently. So I decided to be more like my sister, and sort of what my dad was telling me, and slightly changed the pronunciation of my name, which confused some people. Like one friend, a good friend of mine, he always calls me "Hey Ung," and I haven't asked him to change the way he calls me.
Gotcha. Well, that's wonderful. I'm fascinated. You probably know this about me, but I'm fascinated with languages and culture and all those things. And even just with this whole situation going on in Ukraine and Russia, I was listening to a podcast just yesterday called Rough Translation, and talking about the power of language and the association that is, and going back to your roots, and when turmoil comes about, do you still identify with that place? And really fascinating. So that's why I was interested in hearing that story. Okay, so your dad was a professor, and in some sense, you very much followed in his footsteps, right? I mean, I'm sure you were influenced by that. You ended up going to MIT for your undergrad, and then to Harvard Business School, and then you had a stint at teaching at UNC. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So about 15 years ago, I was asked by a professor at UNC if I would come and teach at the business school to teach entrepreneurial marketing, since some of my functional expertise is in the area of marketing, and I've worked in a lot of startups. So I said yes. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. The really neat thing was that because it was such a difficult thing for me, I got to call my dad and ask him for his advice.
Mm.
And as you kind of alluded to, my dad, of course, was a big influence on my life. I went to MIT for him, actually, because he'd always wanted me to go to MIT. He used to bring copies of engineering magazines back home in hopes that I would follow his footsteps. So I did go to MIT, but I remember when I told him that I was not going to be an engineer, I remember calling him sophomore year, and I remember that phone call. I told him, I said, I'm not going to be an engineer, Dad. And there was this pregnant pause, and he said, we still love you. But anyway, to answer your question about the teaching, yeah, so I did that. And it was really hard. I was really stubborn, and I wanted to teach the way I was taught at Harvard Business School, which was, well, now it's been 30 years ago, and Harvard has changed quite a bit. Even when I was there, they made it less cutthroat because there's a lot of issues about the high levels of stress there. They used to have Saturday classes. They stopped that. But one thing that's very traditional, that's always stuck at Harvard, and I think it will always stay, is teaching the Socratic method, which means that, like if people have watched the movie about Harvard Law School, about the Socratic method, that's very much the way that HBS is taught. And so because no one knows who the professor is going to call on to open the case, which is a cold call, everyone prepares the cases very, very thoroughly in case they're the ones who have to give that eloquent opening, where you have to synthesize like 15 exhibits, all 20 some odd pages of the case study, and provide your recommendation to what the protagonist business issue is at that time. So I was warned by my mentor not to cold call to open, because UNC doesn't do that. But I decided, since if I was going to take the time and effort to go and teach young people, that I was going to teach in the way that I was taught, which I learned a tremendous amount at Harvard. But I learned later that they didn't want to be cold called to open. It was interesting. I taught, one of my first cases was the Starbucks case. I was on customer service, and I cold called this fellow to open. And I still remember his opening. It was 3 words. It was cut the menu. And I was not very happy, because I was used where I went to school, where we had eloquent 5-minute openings. And I said, and he said, that's all. But now looking back at it, I think he was the wise one, not me, because at that time at Starbucks, the menu was so complicated that there was long lines. And truly, if they had just cut the menu, the customer service problem would have been alleviated. Right. So I was a stubborn one trying to do things my way. And in my student feedback at the end of the semester, they said, if I had wanted to go to HBS, I would have applied.
Wow.
So I learned a lot of things. Yeah, you learn just as much from your failures, or you learn even more so. And that's one of the 7 themes I have in my Project Peak work that I write and speak a lot about. Failure, I have it up on my wall. Failure is my number 2 theme. Failure is a good thing. So in a failure talk that I give, I talk about my teaching at UNC being one of my biggest failures.
Okay. Yeah. And I will provide some links for some of this content if people want to check it out.
Yeah, they can check out my YouTube channel if they'd like to see some of my, learn more about my failures.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I have many. I only talked about my top few.
Well, it's so interesting, right? I mean, we live in a world of Instagram where you just capture the great, wonderful moments. And then if it's not wonderful enough, you add a filter to it to make it more wonderful and more beautiful. And it's just so refreshing to hear that, you're saying, hey, let's talk about our failures, right? And let's learn from that. And God uses that, and it can be a gift.
I think that if you open up and are vulnerable, that's when people will come into your life and they'll share too. And that's when you can make the biggest difference.
Yeah. Amen. How did you come to faith in Christ?
I grew up in a family that was church going. So ever since I was a little girl, our family went to Briar Lake Baptist Church in Atlanta, which actually was walkable distance from our house. And my parents were really involved. My dad was active in the men's ministry. And my mom and dad started a Chinese missions church, which met in the chapel, which was a smaller unit, and we had a big sanctuary.
Mhm.
And I was involved in choir and Sunday school. And my sister and I were in the church orchestra. So we were very, very involved. So it was sort of just what I grew up with. And so I was baptized because, you go up to the front in the Southern Baptist Church and proclaimed Christ is my Savior when I was very young in elementary school. Yeah. So
Okay.
my parents had met in Sunday school when they came to America, and my dad was getting his PhD in Kansas State University. So they met actually in a Christian setting and in
Oh, that's cool.
being fed. Yeah, which I think is pretty neat.
That is neat. And how did you end up finding the Chapel Hill Bible Church? I know you've been here for about 20 years. Tell us that story.
Yeah. So a childhood friend of mine, Helena Pierce, her parents were good friends with my parents. She knew that I had become suddenly single about 24 years ago. And she thought that it might be helpful for me to join a class, a women's Bible study class at the church. And so that's how I got first introduced, was because of something that was a tough situation I was going through. And then an old friend, dear friend, reached out and invited me to a class.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Helena, good job. I know you're watching. That's wonderful. Well, let's get a little bit more into the work that you do. You shared a couple of articles that you've written, and you're writing columns that are posted, or they're not posted weekly on WRAL. Is that correct?
Huh?
That's wonderful. Congratulations. That's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, when I was actually first out of college, I thought about not going to Harvard Business School and thought about writing or going to journalism school instead. So it's really kind of neat. I've gone full circle.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. Actually, I worked in management consulting my first job out of college. And then I went to New York City and worked in publishing on the business side at Time Inc. at Sports Illustrated. And I was freelance writing at night, actually. I was writing for Career Vision, and I also started this newspaper with friends from the Asian American Journalists Association called the New Asian Times. And a friend of mine, and it's called AAJA, he was a researcher reporter for Fortune, and he got me an interview with his boss, big boss, Evie Benjamin. She was the deputy chief of reporters. And I went to her and I said, bravely, I said, Evie, I want to come write for you. And I don't want to go to Harvard Business School. I want to come write for you. And the meeting was really short. She said, get out of my office, go make the news, don't write about it, and go to HBS.
Wow.
It was pretty scary. So I listened to her. So I kind of gone full circle, and I really enjoy writing.
It seems like you've had lots of experiences with people giving you very short responses. Cut the menu, get out of my office, make the story.
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, it's interesting. Kevin, I don't know if you've ever watched Shark Tank.
I've seen a couple of clips.
Yeah, the first earlier stage technology company I worked for, he and his partner bought our company, and this was before he became Mr. Wonderful, and that's actually buying my company, educational software company, and another company, and then he's turned around and sold it to Mattel. He bought our company and the other company for about $1 billion. He turned around and sold it to Mattel for $4.2 billion, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah, and actually, after he did that, I got a short email from him saying, you need to come see me in Boston. And I lived in Minneapolis, worked in Minneapolis at the time, and I went to my boss and said, do you think he means it? And she said, yes. And so at that time, there wasn't Airbnb, there wasn't online booking. I called my travel agency and I said, oh, can you please get a hotel room for me? And they said, there's a problem. Everything is booked. And they said, there must be some conference there. And they said, we can get you a conference room. I said, okay, I'll sleep in a conference room. They said, yeah, and you can go take a shower in the gym the next morning.
Wow.
I slept in this conference room. I took a shower. I went in to see Kevin O'Leary and his partner, Michael. And all he did was ask me, he said, write a number down on this piece of paper. Because he said, because I was what's called key man. I ran the product line. That was the largest product line for the company. And they just wanted to make sure that I was going to stay. So they wanted to know how much they'd have to compensate me. And that was the second time someone asked me that. It's the first time I didn't write anything down because I said I'm going to
Wow.
school. But yeah, at least I wrote a number down and I left. So that was a really short meeting. Kevin O'Leary, all he did was ask me, write a number down. And I saw him a few years ago. He came to speak. And after he spoke, I went up to him because there was a line to get our pictures taken. And they wanted me, the people planning it wanted me to be first because they kind of knew my story. And I went up and said, you bought my company like a long time ago. And he said, oh, I remember. And we got a picture taken. So it's pretty funny.
Oh, that's
the
cool.
only second time I've ever spoken to him was he said like a few words to me. Like he said,
Nice.
yeah, I remember.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about your work now with Savvy Growth. Tell us about that organization and what you do and what services you provide.
Yeah, well, I started my business 19 years ago. And at the beginning, for the first many years, the company was called Savvy Marketing Group, because in-house, the last 3 companies, I had led marketing for the 3 tech companies. So I started by my firm leveraging my past experiences, thinking that would make most sense. And so really for many years, we focused on marketing, strategic marketing. And then over time, a couple of things were happening. One was I was getting asked to coach. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One board member brought me in to coach a CEO who needed to be softened because he was a pretty brash personality and he had a not so positive reputation that needed to be softened because they were going to go public and needed to hire a ton of people. And so they wanted him to have a better reputation to help with recruiting.
Okay.
On the opposite end, one board member brought me in to a first-time CEO who needed to have more presence. And so I work with a lot of executives on their executive presence.
Okay.
So back then, this was almost 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, having a coach wasn't necessarily a positive thing. Whereas now the coaching realm has changed so much that now people are proud to say they have a coach because that means that they're being their company is investing in them, and it shows that if they decide to have a coach for themselves, they're investing in themselves. It's a good thing to have a coach. But back then it was not. But so people, those CEOs would say, "Oh, Grace helps with our strategic marketing," which is true also, because one of the workshops I give and talks I get asked to give quite a bit is on personal branding. So certainly having a coach to help you on how you show up, it is part of your strategic marketing. Definitely the CEO is a strategic marketing weapon for a company.
Sure.
So I wanted to make coaching a frontline offering. So 7 years ago, I rebranded our firm from Savvy Marketing Group to Savvy Growth. Another reason why, in addition to making coaching a frontline offering, was that we started being asked to do more general management consulting, not just marketing, but overall business consulting. And so again, I think my career has gone full circle because yet when I was at MIT and then after MIT, I worked for Bain and Company, which is a global consulting firm. But back then I didn't know what I was doing. So I was crunching numbers all night. I didn't quite know what I was doing, but now hopefully with some gray hairs and some wisdom and just being older now, we know what we're doing. And also I have a partner in Boston who's very complimentary to me because he's been a CEO, founder of companies, CFO, COO, and I'm more on the chief marketing officer, sales, business development, and people side. So together we're complementary when we do consulting for our clients.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. It's interesting. You know, you and I were chatting a few minutes ago about, I was sharing one of the books that my dad wrote right on project management, and he did a lot of coaching and consulting as well, which was always very neat just to hear some of his stories of some people he got to work with.
Yeah. I really enjoy it, and it's been a real pleasure to make coaching a frontline offering versus a hidden offering because
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Awesome. So one thing, Grace, that you wrote about in one of your articles, and I think this is a good segue to talk about the intersection of faith and work. Is, you know, you talked about some of your struggles with depression, particularly last year, and you know, and you were just mentioning how that's part part of your story and how you can help people. And I'm thinking of, 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and how God uses things he comforts us, and then he uses us to comfort others as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that journey.
Sure.
And then also just for you to share with us, how have you seen the Lord guide you through this? How is God using you in your work as you serve others and as you help others?
Sure, sure, sure. So back 7 years ago, when I was doing the rebranding, it was a result also of a happiness journey I went on. So 7 years ago, I was going to become an empty nester with my son entering UNC. And I had been a single mom the whole time because I became suddenly single with a 14-month-old. And because of my genetic predisposition, and I talk about this in my happiness talks that I've done for a number of years, but I'm going to be more open about it now. So my mom also suffered from anxiety and depression, but in a more serious way than I did. And I didn't experience that till last year when I had the severe depressive episode. But I allude to that in my happiness talks. And so I went on a year-long journey because I didn't want to fall into despondency. I use that word despondency in my talks, but it's really depression. I did it proactively. And while I did that for personal reasons, I realized that my studies in positive psychology, and I alluded to Project Peak, where I have 7 themes that I talk and write about. I realized that my studies in the positive psychology that I studied could help my coaching clients. So I tell my coaching clients that my coaching is based on foundations of positive psychology. So that was going on 7 years ago. And that's when I rebranded as Savvy Growth, because I really believe in growing people and companies to the best that they can be. And then last year, I experienced depression like I'd never experienced before, really, really deep depression. Because I'd been a Stephen minister earlier on in my life where I helped people who were in the pit. And last year I was in the pit. So I decided to come out in my WRL column, come out about my depression, because there's still a stigma around mental illness and around all that is associated with it. And I really would like to help in movements to remove the stigma, because so many people suffer from depression and so many suffer quietly or silently. And for instance, on campuses, there's so many suicides. Not too long ago, the goalie at Stanford, she was found dead by suicide, and her parents didn't even know that she had any issues. And Miss USA, right before that, at the age of 30, a lot of people didn't realize that till very recently, before she jumped off a building and killed herself. So when I was struggling, I was just praying to God that he would lift me from the depression. I was in such a dark place. I went to the elders after church and asked an elder, just like Jay always says, if anyone needs prayer. I'd never gone up there. I actually walked back to my car that day, and then I thought, I'm going to go back. I need to go back and ask for prayer. And just like a week or so later, you guys did a laying of hands. And so I really, really fervently asked for prayer and asked people to pray for me. And often we seek the Lord and his help when we are in dark places. I think it's just a natural thing. That's often when you pray most fervently. And I definitely was. And I was lifted miraculously, I think, because of all the prayer. Part of my depression was I had layers of grief, but I also had relocation depression because I switched homes. And miraculously, and it truly has to be a miracle, I was able to move back to my home that I missed so much. And it truly is a miracle, especially in this housing market, that I was able to rebuy my house. And I truly believe that was a miracle that God did, because these things just don't happen. And especially in this market with houses being so difficult. So I really thought, because I am so thankful for everything now, like things that I totally took for granted before. I mean, I'm more grateful, I'm happier than I've ever been before. And I really, really want to help others because I was in such a dark place. I know that many, many people are in that place, and I want to help, because it's some of the things that helped me the most were people who had been in that dark place. And one friend of mine who knew that, and I had a small group of people who were really helping me. And one of my friends, he had suffered from depression, and he would call me, text me at just the right times. I was really in that dark place, and you just need people in your lives, and you need friends, professional help. And I hope that I can be a help through my speaking, through my coaching, through the work that I do, my writing, that I can help people. Because to do your best at work, it's happiness. It's success doesn't create happiness. It's happiness that creates success at work. So my column, I themed it happiness and leadership. So really being happy is when you're going to flourish the most at work. And I think that God, he worked a miracle in my life, and now I'm looking for ways that I can help other people. And so, and just things like, for instance, recently, Jay mentioned in a letter that he sent to us about when we were at the topic of God and money. He mentioned this book, God and Money: How We Discovered True Riches at Harvard Business School, that he had used as a research book for one of his sermons. And so I was like, wait, Harvard Business School? We didn't.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
HBS is like, when I went there, I mean, it's such an intense place. It's like capitalist Mecca. I mean, it's just so about money. And so I immediately ordered this. And because I knew we were doing our talk today, I finished reading it late last night. And this book has really convicted me. And I think what Jay wrote in this letter is so true. Yeah, all things come from God, are sustained by God, and are for God's glory. And one thing that I read last night is toward the end of the book that I want to share with you, which I think is pretty cute. As the saying goes, money is like manure. When you pile it up, it stinks. But if you spread it around, it can do good. So I had already been talking to my financial advisor about how, because I'm in the second half of my life now, how I can have impact. And so in philanthropic ways. And then reading this book has helped give me more guidance in that journey, because I want through my work to have impact, and then also through my giving of money, time, talent, and treasure. So,
wow.
So I just finished reading this last night. So I thank Jay for making me aware of this book, and then I'm going to reach out to these two younger alums to let them know how much impact it had on me.
Good.
Check in on where they are.
Maybe we can do a podcast, the four of us.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I listened to that book on a trip one time, and it was really enjoyed it.
I read it, and I made a lot of marks, and so so I think, to fully answer your question, I'm still discovering what God has in store for me to help, because my remission was only the week before Christmas. It was December 18th, the day that I found out that I was going to be able to move back to my house quickly. I went immediately into remission. I'd only been on one of these antidepressants for like 3 days. I really think the miracle that God gave me made a huge difference in my healing. So,
wow, that's wonderful, Grace. I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you for your courage and your vulnerability in that, because I'm sure a lot of people who listen to this will have questions. They will feel maybe the freedom for the first time to say, hey, it's okay to talk about this stuff in a Christian context, right? It's not a shame thing. It's not a reflection on your sanctity or your holiness or your faith. And we, as a community of faith who love and care for one another, we need to discuss these things, and we need to know that it's okay to say, hey, I'm in the pit. You know, who's been there and can help me, right?
Right. If everyone is truly honest, there's a lot of hands that would be raised, but a lot of people are scared to talk about it. I think things have improved, but there still, I think, is a big stigma. And I was like, I didn't tell many people, and it's scary for me. But now that I'm not in that pit, I've realized that the best way that I can help is by being open. And so that's when I got the ask from the editor of WRL TechWire if I would start writing a weekly column, I immediately said yes. I didn't know exactly what it was going to look like, but I said I'll start in mid-February because I was just coming out of my depression. I wanted to think thoughtfully about it.
Yeah.
And so I wrote, when I posted on LinkedIn, my first column, which launched on Valentine's, I said, it will be the greatest Valentine's gift to me if my coming out and sharing my challenges helps you or someone you work with. So I really, really, you probably taught me pretty fervent about this. Yep.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Grace, thank you again so much for your time. Thanks for sharing your story with us. And I really do believe that the Lord's going to use it. Your personal story and your professional story as well. Your interest in growing in these areas and exploring how the Lord can use you. I commend you for that. And we'll be praying for that. So thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you, and Roddy, and for all the pastoral staff, what you guys all do.
Well, it's our pleasure. We love being part of this family with you guys. So
Thanks
God
so
bless you.
much.
Bye.